Hello, Yasmin. Yasmin Razack.
Hi,
I'm so happy to see you.
so
And
happy to see you too.
yeah, it's a couple of years since we last saw each other, so it's great. Now, you're at Centennial College in Toronto, where
Yes,
you're Director of Global Citizenship, Education and Inclusion.
yes,
So
correct.
we're going to have a very interesting chat here, I think. Um,
Yes.
you're the first person that I've spoken to um, who's at a college. And so I wonder if you could just explain what college means in a Canadian context.
College means it's an applied learning environment, and this was started Centennial is actually the first college in Canada. So this is something that started just a little over 50 years ago, and it was really to recognize those that face barriers getting into university. And so what the system wanted to do was to allow for people to attend school where they can learn applied skills. This included the trades and various other just education that would allow them to work across diverse industries. So at Centennial, we do have 7 schools, which include transportation, culinary arts, hospitality, communications, media arts and design. We have a community and health studies. We have a liberal arts as well. And so I think that that was really opened up. We consider ourselves an access college as well, that allow for diverse populations to engage with education in a way that was normally shut off to specific populations.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for that. So I wonder whether you think I mean, you've got wide-ranging experience. Do you think there's a difference between internationalization in the college environment compared to the university environment?
Yeah, and I think one of the things when I think about that answer is that it really does have to do with around how the academic quality assurance processes within colleges versus universities. And, you know, being in universities and knowing that faculty at colleges do have quite a lot of independence, but there is a research stream within universities, and faculty very much operate very independently and do have a lot of autonomy around their courses, as they do in colleges as well. One of the things that happens in colleges is that we do have a little bit more opportunity to work in collaboration with faculty to determine things like learning outcomes, to co-develop, for example, assignments. And this is the model that Centennial College has really adopted through our signature learning experience that was developed just over now 12 years ago. And it was an initiative by our president, which allowed for our whole entire community to really adopt the principles and a methodology that allowed the faculty to work with the administration on developing learning outcomes that can be integrated within all of the applied programs, but very much in collaboration with faculty. So if we are going to integrate global citizenship and equity with a professor that is working in the school of transportation, we have their experts, we have their expertise, but then we also have our knowledge within our office that can collaborate on integrating internationalization. Whereas at a university, it's very much rooted in the research of the faculty, the discipline, and again, that independence. So I feel as though sometimes that becomes more of a barrier in understanding how deep we can go with internationalization at a university versus a college, in my experience.
I'm just wondering if, to summarize that, is it maybe a slightly more managerial type quality assurance than the autonomy that you've just described in universities?
Yeah, and it's also the vastness. I mean, right. If you look, for example, at, say, for example, University of Toronto or York University. University of Toronto has 10,000 employees. They have independent faculty of medicine. They have faculty of engineering. You know, we have 22,000 students at a college. There's 25,000 in the faculty of liberal arts at York University. So this scale somewhat
Yeah, yeah,
is so different. And
yeah.
so I'm very much connected with the deans, with the academic leaders. We're in the same meetings. We're strategizing on the same business plan goals and the vision of the college. And I think one of the ways the leadership within colleges are more connected in a way. Like I've seen both of my presidents, because I've been under two. They know the names of almost, like a lot of their faculty, and it's just, and so I think that that's the relationship building, and it's also trust, because here you have faculty that are very, very, very tied to their curriculum. They are at the college too, but I think it's a different when you're the tenure track positions at the universities where they're required, to produce this body of work that is reflective of advancing knowledge in their field. And that is dependent on how they move up in the university. To have an institutional mission of internationalization connect with that can be a lot more challenging.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, you very kindly invited me to come and talk about internationalization at your fantastic.
And you kindly accepted.
Well, you had this amazing conference on inclusive internationalization. I learned so much from that. And it's really interesting to see how you've been implementing inclusion at Centennial. So you've got a very diverse population in the city. I think your college has a very diverse catchment as well.
133 countries represented.
Okay, right, and but the local population is very diverse, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
You've taken this approach of incorporating internationalization into the equity, the inclusion, the diversity agendas, and you've brought that all together, and I found it absolutely fascinating, and to see it working was really interesting. So can you just give some examples about how you've made this happen, how you've brought together those two sides, internationalization and the diversity?
Yes, it was from the beginning. What we decided to do is develop learning outcomes that were reflective of internationalization, global citizenship, and equity. And so one of the things that was integrative in all 6 of them was a recognition that this had to be something that would be translatable to diverse populations. And also noting, I think the faculty as well had to be able to feel comfortable in teaching this across diverse disciplines. And so for example, in the culinary arts school, when we have chefs that are teaching students obviously cuisines from all around the world, one of the things that we connected with them, okay, well, how are we going to make them aware of issues related to indigenous populations, sustainable food, and also the racialization that happens across environments around the world that produce our food, right? And so they could be a school that doesn't talk about those things completely. And would the students be okay? They would. But would they be sustainable? Would they recognize the impact of who is producing the food, where are they producing the food? And also, even when we talk about, I'm just using chefs because you asked for an example, we had one chef talk about what a bowl of rice means across different cultures, how the rice is cultivated, and then what rice dishes are important across cultures and why. So he brought in the historical legacies of rice production, and then he, translated it into something that was current. And I think that was just brilliant, because every student, if you look upon rice dishes from all around the world, every student was able to produce that. But then the equity issues on top of it, they were able to, as an internationalized population, bring their understanding of the inequities that happen on food production. So, I mean, I have loads of examples, but I think that that's something where, even when it comes to things like disability, or when it comes to gender inequity, we had something in the Vietnam in terms of education. It's also one of the things I want to impress upon this conversation whenever I speak is that I really, really admire the faculty that look at how different societies are empowering diverse communities. So it's not just from this position that these communities are oppressed. And I think that that's so important in internationalization, because the dominant discourse is around oppressed inequities, across diverse communities. And so I think one of the things one of our professors did in the School of Business, actually too, was really discover how, for example, the education processes have allowed for more women and girls to access education, through the connection of business and industry. So I think that that's also something that we've done in a way, so that our population recognizes that we are not only cognizant, but we're mindful, and we don't want to. We're in a Western context, and that's when we do all of the work around inclusive internationalization. You've also taught me this well in the work that you've done, is that Western location consistently has to be disrupted, because what you're going to find is always going to be from that dominant voice. And so that's the process of inclusive internationalization, and also allowing students to really co-create, co-develop, their assignments, and even the pedagogical practice in which the way that the faculty is teaching it. We had a situation where a faculty member was talking about the mining of cobalt, which creates this on your screen. And it was an assignment that has been done, and there was a student in the class that was from the country in which that mines it in Africa, and he allowed him to teach the lesson, and bring the students up to speed on the current practices, the realization of the impact of what's happening. And he said it was one of the most powerful lessons that he's ever had at the college. So, and he was in, like, I think, electrical engineering. So it was really, though, and I could give you so many stories. It's just that I think is truly inclusive internationalization.
There's a lot of good stuff on your website about this as well, which I'll put a link to from the video. But I was going to say, it's so rare to hear this kind of description of internationalization with equity, because people, when they talk about internationalization, it's still the dominant theme is student mobility, partnerships, league tables. So having it so solidly embedded, this is what really impressed me when I was there. But I wanted to ask you just finally, you've been there for a number of years now. I can't remember how many.
Wow.
12.
2 years not leave, but 12. Yes.
So, and during that time, have you seen the progress that's been made? I mean, how much? It's a long-term story, but people always say, "Oh, how are we going to do this?" Is it easy to? I mean, can you make a difference in a relatively short time?
Well, yeah, and I think, when you say short time, you can't see, but I feel as though I have the bruises on my back, because when I came in, it was defensive, very, very defensive, and not across all. I mean, you're always going to get the 10-20%. It was our leadership. I have to say, President Ann Buller made it so apparent that this is a value of the college. This is who we are. And every single moment that she had to speak to our population, this was emphasized and emphasized. So I felt as though I had her armor kind of around me. And then when I faced resistance, because it was mandatory, we were able to get it in with resistance. But now I have professors asking, and I have, administrators asking. I'll never forget when I was asked by an academic lead who is in the architecture program, and I had to read building codes this thick, and I was reading it, and then I was just amazed at how many issues are within the development of buildings. And then we talked about it on a local scale, and then we took it global, and I just thought, this is amazing. Like,
Mm.
it's just amazing. And as it progressed, I mean, faculty, stop me in the halls and that, like, Yasmin, can you or your team come in and discuss this? Because as you know, with the influx of the knowledge economy, people don't really realize how young things like Facebook, Twitter,
Mm.
Instagram are. I mean, they're just over 10 years old, right? So then when you think about when this started and when that started,
Yeah.
so now you're hearing what's happening in New Zealand, you're hearing what's happening, you know, in remote places. And so, well, places that you wouldn't know about. So
Yeah.
these issues are right at the forefront.
Yeah.
And then they're coming in our classrooms, right? The students are there.
Yeah.
So if we're not talking about it, we're the ones that are going to be asked and questioned. So that was all also happening at the same time. So that, I think, also helped. But I think it also, it's values based. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that those values. Then you talked about President Buller, but it seems as though they're being taken forward with the new president as well. So seems as though it's sort of embedded in the college now. And
Yes, and it's part of, yeah, it's like if you work at, I don't want to bring up, corporate, but it's like if you work at a place where you have to greet the customer a certain way, or you have to move forward with global citizenship and equity
Mm.
in your courses,
Yeah.
or you're not part of the community. Like, it's that's just the way now it has been. And people have really, I think one of the, also, just one other story is that there was a nurse who worked very closely with our office, and she wanted to realize the impact of LGBTQ training within her students before they became actual nurses. So she did a trial, and she had them go through, again, this was all through the curriculum, she had them go through what we call positive space training. And the results were fascinating, because they noted that in their as clinicians, they were able to relate to their patients with inclusivity in more of a meaningful way, because there's so much stigma attached
Mm.
to these communities. And so, I mean, it's really been eye-opening, the
Yeah.
power of this work. So
Well, I think you're doing absolutely fantastic work. I hope more people will learn about it from this conversation and carry on doing what you're doing. It's great. Thank you so much for talking to me today, Yasmin. It's really nice to see you.
nice to see you too. Thanks for having me.